Solomon Webb was 40 years old when his wife slid divorce papers across the dinner table, and the smile on her face was the most composed thing in the room. She had chosen a Thursday evening. She had cooked first. Shrimp and grits, his favorite. The recipe she reserved for occasions she wanted to remember. She had poured the wine. She had waited until he took the first sip. Then she reached under the table and placed the envelope in the center of his plate. She folded her hands. The smile held. Solomon set his fork down. He opened the envelope. He read the first page of the petition slowly, taking in the case caption, the attorney's name, the firm name printed in clean serif type at the top of the page. Artwell and Cross, LAPP, 3,180 Peachtree Road Northeast, Suite 900, Atlanta, Georgia. He read the address again. He read the firm name again. He set the petition down beside his wine glass. He picked up the glass. He finished it. Camille had spent 14 months preparing for this moment. She had retained what her friends told her was the sharpest family law boutique in Buckhead. She had paid a $22,500 retainer out of a savings account Solomon didn't know she'd opened. She had arranged everything with the careful confidence of a woman who had studied her target and found no gaps. She did not know that Hartwell and Cross, LEIP, operated from a building whose parent commercial entity was held at 71% by a company called Webb Capital Group. She did not know that Webb Capital Group was Solomon's. She thought she had hired the finest legal team in Atlanta to dismantle her husband. She had handed him the keys. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light entered Solomon's home office at the angle he had designed for it, through the east-facing window he had specified during the renovation, calculated to give 2 hours of clean working light before the glare required a shade. He had bought the Buckhead Colonial 8 years prior, gutted it room by room over one long winter, and rebuilt it with the patience of a man who understood that hurrying was simply another form of waste. A was reviewing site plans when he heard the house wake up, the coffee maker cycling on, Camille's heels on the hardwood, moving from the bedroom to the bathroom to the closet in the sequence that had never varied. His Aunt Eleanor had told him once, sitting across from him at her kitchen table in Decatur when he was 17 years old, and convinced he already understood something about people. Son, the quietest man in the room has either nothing to say or everything. Most folks can't tell the difference. That is your advantage. A had been building things since before he understood why. Not houses exactly, though he had shaped enough of those. A built holding structures, patient arrangements of capital and relationships, and quietly acquired interests. Webb Capital Group. The company had founded at 31, with 2 college friends and a list of undervalued commercial properties no one else had thought to pursue. Operated from a modest suite in Buckhead and appeared on operating agreements and distribution schedules, but never on storefronts or press releases. Solomon had constructed it that way deliberately. Visibility, in his experience, was a feature that primarily served other people's purposes. To Camille and her circle, Solomon was a developer. She said it the way someone describes a profession that is serviceable but not interesting. It was accurate, as far as it went. I had met Camille 6 years ago at a rooftop event in Midtown, hosted by the luxury hotel brand she worked for as regional marketing director. She had been managing 3 conversations simultaneously, moving through the room with the confidence of someone entirely aware of their own effect. I had watched her for 40 minutes before she crossed to him and said, without preamble, "You've been watching me." He had said, "I've been evaluating the room." She had laughed. They had talked until the bartender started stacking chairs. She had asked him, at some point in the second hour, if he ever got tired of building things. He had said he got tired of building things for other people's visions. She had smiled at that. He had thought it was because she understood him. He had married her 2 years later. She was sharp and magnetic, and he had believed at the time. Fundamentally honest, he had not been wrong about the first 2. Looking back, the signals had assembled themselves into a pattern he could now read plainly. The new energy she'd returned with from a 4-day wellness retreat in Savannah that produced not a single photograph. The way her phone, which had once sat carelessly open on kitchen counters, now traveled face down into every room with her. The twice-weekly calls with her friend Keisha that left her laughing in a register he hadn't heard from her in years. The dinner parties at which a man named Derek Weston appeared a second time, and then a third, always with reasons for his presence that grew less specific the more familiar they became. The particular way she kissed his cheek some evenings, present in the gesture, absent behind it, the kind of affection that had been practiced until it looked natural. He had noticed each of these things. He had filed them. That Tuesday, Solomon's managing director had sent over the quarterly summary for Webb Capital's active holdings, 12 positions across commercial real estate, professional services, and one boutique hospitality group. Solomon had skimmed it during a conference call. Nothing flagged, nothing unusual in the numbers. He had not paused on any individual line. It had not needed to. The portfolio was performing. He had trusted the structure he had built. That evening, he heard Camille's voice behind the half-closed door of the guest room, lower than her normal register, measured and deliberate. Tell Craig the Thursday timeline is confirmed. It doesn't know yet. That is the point. A pause. Then, quieter still. Hartwell's team is ready. Just tell Craig to stay calm. Solomon had not moved. He had set down the glass he was carrying. He had walked back to his desk and pulled up the quarterly summary. Item 7 on the portfolio list read, Hartwell and Cross, LLP, Professional Services, majority held via WSM Ventures subsidiary. He stared at it. Then he went to work. He did not sleep. By 2 in the morning, he was at his desk with the Webb Capital Incorporation documents, the subsidiary ownership chain, and the acquisition memo his managing director had filed when Peachtree Legal Holdings, the parent company of Hartwell and Cross, had been added to the portfolio 18 months prior. At the time, it had been a clean, straightforward acquisition. A profitable boutique with strong retention numbers, well-regarded in Buckhead's family law community, positioned to appreciate. He had signed off on it between 2 other closings and moved on. He pulled the corporate registry. Peachtree Legal Holdings showed Webb Capital at 71%, held through WSM Ventures. Solomon was the sole member of WSM Ventures. His hands did not shake. It moved to the household financial portal next. The joint savings account showed a withdrawal of $22,500 6 weeks prior, categorized simply as legal. He traced it to a separate account at a different institution, registered in Camille's name alone, opened 11 months ago. He pulled 3 years of joint statements and built a spreadsheet in a second window. What emerged, sorted by date and amount, was a pattern of 43 transfers over 31 months, ranging from $310 to $4,200, totaling $61,000, moved to accounts he had no access to. Some were labeled savings. Some were labeled personal. Several were labeled nothing at all. His face remained perfectly calm. Ekros referenced the dates. The first transfer had occurred 8 weeks after Camille returned from a conference in Chicago, the same conference at which Derek Weston had, according to his professional profile, been a featured speaker. Solomon verified this in 5 minutes. He then went back through 12 months of Camille's calendar entries, the shared one she had stopped updating 7 months ago. He found the Chicago trip. He found 2 other trips whose hotel bookings did not match the conferences she had cited. The discrepancy in dates was not subtle. It was 4 days in one instance and 3 in another. Tools were meant to work, not shine. The numbers had been working this whole time. He had simply not been reading them. It then pulled the corporate filings for the events marketing firm, where Weston served as senior director. Camille's hotel brand had engaged the firm for 3 regional campaigns over the past 2 years, at a combined value of $340,000. Camille's name appeared on 2 of the 3 vendor approval documents. No competing bids were on file for either contract. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined the way he built things. He compiled everything: the subsidiary ownership chain, the account statements, the transfer log, the vendor approvals, the acquisition memo, into a single encrypted folder on a drive he kept in the locked credenza of his home office. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it Shrimp and Grits. Celeste Drummond had managed Solomon's corporate legal work for 6 years. Precise, unhurried, with the particular gift of hearing a complicated situation and immediately locating the one fact inside it that changed everything else. She had helped structure 3 of Solomon's most complex acquisitions without a single filing error. And she had the professional composure of someone who had been surprised by nothing in a very long time. Solomon laid out the complete picture at her conference table on a Wednesday morning. He did not editorialize. He presented the documents in chronological order: the subsidiary ownership chain, the retainer invoice, the account transfer history, the vendor authorization irregularities, the professional background on Weston. Celeste read without interrupting. When she set the last document down, she was quiet for a moment. "You understand what this means for Hartwell and Cross," she said. "They cannot represent a client in adverse proceedings against their own majority owner," Solomon said. "Georgia Rules of Professional Conduct. Rule 1.7. Conflict of interest. Direct and unviable. The moment their managing partner understands who you are relative to their ownership structure, they have an ethical obligation to withdraw, and likely had that obligation from the moment Camille walked through their door and gave them her married name." She paused. "They may not have known." "The Web Capital connection runs through WSM Ventures," Solomon said. "Not visible at the firm's operating level. They likely ran a standard client conflict check and found nothing." Celeste looked at him steadily. "So Camille hired her divorce attorney from a firm she didn't realize you owned, and the firm accepted the engagement without knowing it either." "That appears to be correct." "Then that," Celeste said with the calm of a woman who found this more clarifying than shocking, "is not a problem you created. It is a problem the situation created." She wrote something on her legal pad. "When the managing partner at Hartwell learns the ownership structure, he will have no choice but to withdraw from the engagement. The question is whether we bring that to his attention before or after we've completed our own preparation." She looked up. "My recommendation is after." She opened to a fresh page. "Now, tell me about the financial irregularities." Real Power operated in quiet rooms. His aunt Eleanor lived in the same house in Decatur she had owned for 30 years, the one with the side porch that still held the same iron chairs Solomon had sat in as a boy. She answered the door on a Saturday morning in the house dress she'd worn for as long as he could remember, with the expression of a woman who had known something was coming for longer than he had. She made tea. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited. He told her everything. It laid it out in order: the phone call he had overheard, the portfolio entry, the ownership chain, the account transfers, the vendor approvals, the conference dates that didn't match the hotels. He did not editorialize. He simply told her what the document said. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the table. Then she looked at him. "That man Weston," she said. "Tall. Brown car. He picked her up from your house on a Sunday, about 8 months back. She told me you were away for work." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't say anything because I thought you knew." Solomon absorbed this without expression. "You have always built things quietly," Eleanor said, "even when you were small. You never showed anybody what you were making until it was done." She looked at him the way she had looked at him his entire life, with the particular steadiness of someone who had chosen to believe in you before you had given them reason to. "Finish this one the same way." The forensic accountant Celeste retained found 4 additional irregularities beyond what Solomon had already documented. 2 of the vendor approvals Camille had signed involved falsified competing bid documents, forms that appeared to have been prepared and backdated to comply with the hotel brand's procurement policy. This was not a matter for the divorce proceedings. This was a matter for the brand's corporate ethics board, and Celeste had prepared the referral summary by Thursday. The brand's general counsel had been on the phone within 24 hours of receiving it. It also emerged, through the accountant's background research, that Derek Weston had been terminated from a prior employer, a regional hospitality group in Charlotte, under circumstances involving vendor contract irregularities, 18 months before he had appeared at that Chicago conference and met Camille. The prior termination had been managed quietly without public record, as these things often were. Solomon received this information and placed it in the folder on his encrypted drive. Preparación was the work. Everything else was simply timing. He drove home that Tuesday and ate dinner with Camille. She asked about his day. He described the zoning meeting. She described the conference call. He cleared the plates. He thanked her for cooking. He sat with her through most of a television program she had chosen and went to bed at 10. He slept well. He had always slept well when the preparation was complete. The conference room at Hartwell and Cross occupied the southwest corner of the ninth floor, a room Solomon had walked through once, 18 months prior. During the due diligence walkthrough before the Peachtree Legal Holdings acquisition, A remembered the floors, reclaimed oak, stained dark, well-maintained. He remembered thinking the space was worth more than the firm understood. Camille arrived 8 minutes early, which was what she did when she was confident. She was wearing the charcoal dress she reserved for important meetings and carried the expression of a woman arriving to collect something already owed to her. Her attorney, Craig Whitmore, was already seated. He stood when she entered. He did not stand when Solomon and Celeste walked in 30 seconds behind the firm's office manager. Anhe did not stand when Solomon's managing director, James Park, followed them in carrying a manila folder and a business card case. James set a card in front of Whitmore. It read, James S. Park, Managing Director, Web Capital Group. Whitmore looked at the card. He looked at Solomon. He looked back at the card. Celeste placed a second document in front of him. The corporate ownership structure of Peachtree Legal Holdings, 3 tiers of it. Solomon T. Webb's name appearing at the top of the chain as the sole member of WSM Ventures. Whitmore picked it up. He read it. He set it down. The color in his face had shifted. Mr. Whitmore, Celeste said, I believe you understand why we're all here. Whitmore stood. He asked everyone to excuse him for a moment. He walked into the corridor. They could hear his voice through the glass, controlled but accelerating, on the phone with someone who was not receiving the information calmly. It took 5 minutes. He returned. He had the expression of a man who had just confirmed something he had hoped was not true. He looked at Camille directly, and his professional composure was doing considerable work. Mrs. Webb, he said carefully, there is a conflict of interest that prevents this firm from continuing to represent you in this matter. I'll need to explain the specifics in a separate conversation, but I am not able to proceed today. Camille's expression changed slowly. The way a carefully held thing changes when you understand it is no longer being held. What does that mean? She said. It was not a question. It was a person buying time. Whitmore looked at James Park's business card on the table. He looked at Solomon. He did not answer her directly. I'm sorry, he said. I am not able to explain further in this setting. Camille turned to Solomon, and there, briefly for just a moment, she tried the appeal she had always kept available. The softening of the voice, the shift in the eyes, the suggestion that between the two of them, behind all of this, there might still be something worth negotiating. Solomon looked at her. He said nothing. It was Camille's mother who spoke. Eleanor had called her, not Solomon. That had been Eleanor's decision, made quietly on a Sunday afternoon, and Solomon had been glad for it. She had been waiting in the lobby, and she had come into the conference room when James left the door open behind him. She sat in the chair beside her daughter without touching her. Camille, her mother said. One word. Flat and final and full of the particular grief of a parent who has stopped being surprised and started simply being tired. Camille looked at her mother. She looked back at her hands. Celeste moved efficiently. She walked through the account transfer history. $61,000 over 31 months. Documented and dated. She described the vendor authorization irregularities, the falsified competing bids, the corporate ethics referral already in the brand's general counsel's hands. She described Derek Weston's prior employment record. The room was entirely still. The purpose of today, Solomon said, and his voice was exactly as level as it had been on the Thursday evening she had placed an envelope in the center of his dinner plate, is not to threaten you. It is to make sure you understand what the documents say before you decide how to proceed. He paused. You hired a firm without reading who owned it. You moved money without documenting where it went. You approved contracts without following the process your employer required. He held her gaze for a single moment. You made a lot of decisions without reading the foundation first. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He nodded to Celeste and to James. He looked at Camille's mother once, and what passed between them was acknowledgement and nothing more. She had raised a daughter. She would go on raising one. That was not his work to do. Then he walked out. The reclaimed oak floors held beneath him. 16 months had passed like the quiet progress of well-laid groundwork, invisible from the outside, entirely sound underneath. Solomon's new house was a Craftsman in Inman Park, a neighborhood whose bones had always appealed to him. A three-bedroom it had taken down to the studs and rebuilt across 6 weekends and 2 extended work stretches with the same patience he brought to everything. The floors were wide plank white oak, sealed smooth. The kitchen was exactly what he had drawn on the planning pages. The back terrace faced a garden he had designed on graph paper before he placed the first plant. The Webb Capital portfolio had continued to move forward. He had sold the Peachtree Legal Holdings stake in the quarter following the proceedings. There was no reason to hold it, and the ethics matter had added complications he had no interest in carrying, and redirected the capital into a mixed-use development in Old Fourth Ward that was scheduled to break ground in the spring. It was the kind of project he had built toward for years, the kind whose scale required patience and structural thinking and the willingness to let the work proceed without announcing itself. 2 of his former colleagues from the early Webb Capital days had asked to come in as limited partners. He had said yes to both. Some things, when the foundation was right, were worth building with other people. The hotel brand had terminated Camille's employment 7 weeks after Celeste's referral reached the general counsel. Derek Weston had departed his firm under circumstances the company described publicly as a mutual decision. He had not been heard from in a professional context since. Camille had retained a new attorney and received a substantially reduced settlement, the $61,000 in documented transfers treated as dissipation of marital assets. The outstanding liability from the ethics referral factored into the total picture. She was in a 1-bedroom apartment in Marietta. Her closest friend from their social circle had quietly stopped returning her calls. Her parents maintained contact, but something in that relationship had been rearranged and would not be put back the way it was. Solomon had heard this from Eleanor over coffee on a Sunday. He had listened. He had moved on. Her name was Renata Sims. She was a landscape architect, 42, with a quality of attention that meant she looked at things, soil, rooms, structures, conversations, with the same considered focus she gave to everything. She had found the graph paper garden plan on his kitchen table on her second visit to the house and studied it for 10 minutes without being asked, pointing out 2 drainage considerations he had already identified, and 1 he hadn't. He had found that specific. It was on the back terrace on a Saturday morning in April, when Renata brought out 2 coffees and settled into the chair he had built from salvaged teak the previous autumn. The garden was beginning, the fig tree taking hold in the south corner, the blueberries coming in along the fence row, the kitchen herbs establishing themselves in the beds closest to the door. He had planted everything himself on a timeline he had planned on paper before he turned the first spade of soil. He had known what he was building before he built it. "You planned all of this before you started," she said, meaning the garden. "I plan before I start," he said. She looked at the fig tree for a moment. "What happens when the plan meets the reality?" "You adjust the plan," Solomon said, "not the foundation." She considered that. The morning light moved through the terrace slowly and without hurry, the way April light does in Atlanta, when there is nothing it needs to prove. The garden was level. The foundation was sound. It was free. He was whole. He had built accordingly. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.